and learn from each other. And in thinking about both the kind of information that you want to provide and really understanding the kind of information that your communities need, this is both a supply and a demand challenge in an attention economy. So thinking about what is most relevant, what is most timely, what is most useful to the audiences that you are trying to serve, how do you provide that? I was constantly arguing with my journalists who had lots of stories that they wanted to write. And I would say, now make me want to read it. And think about how I'm going to read it. Because it may be that this shouldn't be a story. This maybe should be a graphic or a map or a list or a video. You have the most powerful storytelling tools of any group of communicators in all of human history at your disposal. And so that's the other thing I hope that you will share. Have you found things that have surprised you about what has really worked in breaking through to audiences or in capturing attention or in really explaining hard questions and hard issues, or models that have been particularly successful for you that others can learn from? I hope this is a really rich conversation, and I am so excited to have Sue here to lead you in the first of our discussions. Sue, welcome to the Kenney School. And thank you for doing this.
I have two mics. I'll go with this one for now. I have two mics. It's a luxury. Hi, everybody. I'm Sue Cross from Institute for Nonprofit News, INN. We are so grateful to the Shorenstein Center for hosting us today, to Nancy and Caroline and Liz here, who have done amazing work coordinating this so that we all could gather. There were really two inspirations for this meeting. And many of you in this room were the inspiration for it, primarily because over the last 2 years, we do calls a couple of times a month, open calls for anybody thinking about forming a news organization, starting up something, usually where they'd lost news, if not entirely, mostly. And almost every one of these open calls over the last 2 years has involved someone from Massachusetts. And we just kept seeing this. And then the other thing that was so fascinating to us as journalists is that the majority of people calling in were not journalists. It was those of you who are working for community foundations, some elected officials, League of Women Voters, a bookstore owner, random business people. And so what really excited us about what's happening in Massachusetts is this: when we talk about news as part of democracy, as part of civic life, we can see that happening here. The second thing that more pointedly inspired this gathering was when, as most of you know, newspapers that are ad supported have faced terrible, terrible financial pressure over the last years and made devastating cuts. And so that's happened here as well with primarily Gannett newspapers. And there was a national story about it that kind of said, communities in Massachusetts, they're just going to lose their local news and there's nothing they can do about it. And I thought, well, the heck with that. That's not the case. Look at all these people gathering. And so that really inspired us to gather you and to work with Shorenstein to put this on, because this is happening around the country. But here in Massachusetts, you really are leading. I will also say this is happening globally. And because of nonprofit status in the US, and because of this marriage of civic interests and journalism, what's happening in the US has happened a little earlier and faster, but this is now spreading across the world. And so journalism is not going to look like the institutions we all grew up with. And I love newspapers, grew up literally typesetting one in my basement. And, but it's not going to look like that. It's going to look different, but you're seeing that reinvention in what's happening now. So that's what brings us all together here today. There are, just to give you a scene for those of you who are not part of this network of nonprofit news organizations, there's now about 450 across the country. there were only about 24 15 years ago. So the pace of growth is like 15 to 20% a year. Together, there are more than 4,000 journalists in these newsrooms. So that is now more journalists out in the world than the last remaining newspaper group, which is Gannett Gatehouse. It's more than the whole NPR network. It's a very loose alliance and network, but a powerful one, both in the amount of reporting it's producing, that it also shares not just directly to the public, but provides to commercial media as well in digital platforms. And then in sharing the learnings, as Nancy invited you to do, this is for whatever INN does, you all do 100 times as much sharing with each other and helping each other grow, figure out problems, what worked, what didn't work. So it's a very powerful network strategy to rebuilding the field of journalism. We have an amazing panel here today of people who are doing this work. And we're going to start out with Walter Robinson from the Boston Globe, editor at large, one of the most famous Massachusetts journalists, thanks to leading the Spotlight team that won the Pulitzer for uncovering the Catholic Church, the extent of the abuses within the Catholic Church. But Robbie also is one of the founding board members of the New Bedford Light. And so really has this amazing perspective on the strength of traditional media, which is still really important here in Boston between the Globe, WBUR, WGBH, and so forth, and all this new energy. We have two teams of journalists that I'll introduce as they come up from what are more or less standalone communities, Newton and New Bedford, covering local news, and then Gita Pradham and Greg Ball talking about what's happening with startups and why does it matter to community even within this metro area, which is not a news desert, but where you need this variety of voices and coverage. So we have about an hour and a half. We have a large panel with people with amazing things to say. So we will move through that. We are going to leave plenty of time for Q&A with you all, and we'll run mics around. And then we'll have some open time between 12 and 12:30 just for people to gather and talk. This setting is kind of academic in the setting, but we want it to be a discussion. So we'll have some of that open time for mingling at the end. And then the members of INN who are in these newsrooms will be staying after and workshopping for a couple of hours about sharing tips on building community support, community engagement, and so forth. So that's our plan for the day. And with that, I'm going to hand off to Robbie.
I'd rather. It's a great crowd. But Nancy, the next time you schedule one of these, if you want a bigger crowd, schedule it when the Patriots are playing. Anyway, thank you, Nancy, for hosting this. And then there is Sue Cross. Sue is a towering figure in American journalism, for those of you who don't know her. What she has done at INN is both revolutionary and visionary. Sue and her staff have imagined, conceived, and nourished an ecosystem that has made it possible for millions of people now to once again have the information they need to make informed decisions, a return to the journalism that holds power to account. For many of us, nonprofit journalism is the antidote to our collective malaise. For 2 decades now, we've looked on in disbelief and often averted our eyes as the vigorous journalism we had been accustomed to withered away. Over the last several years, this existential threat to the roots of our democracy has become ever more dispiriting. Often, it seems, we are a nation where people seek the affirmation they crave rather than the information they need. Much of the country has been fixated on whether we can trust the news we read and see. What is more dispiriting or worrisome is that much of what should be in the news is not being covered at all. Most everywhere, the watchdog stopped barking. But now the watchdog is reawakening. Perhaps nowhere is that more evident than here in Massachusetts, where nonprofit news outlets seem to be propagating like rabbits. Sue mentioned that there are 450 members of INN. I think there are 600 represented here today. But why us? Why now? And why here? There's no ready answer, but there are some obvious clues. First up, here in Massachusetts, we were spoiled. We had a history of exceptional journalism in this state, and I'm not talking about in Boston. Let me give you a couple of examples. The Boston Globe never achieved a penetration rate of more than 35% in Eastern Massachusetts. In contrast, the Washington Post at one point left its newspaper on more than 70% of the doorsteps in greater Washington, D.C. So why did the Globe operate under such a low ceiling? The answer lies in the suburbs. Unlike any other major city I know of, Boston was ringed by strong, prosperous, competitive dailies that covered the hell out of their readership areas. Virtually all of them, for instance, had statehouse bureaus. In 1980, there were 55 reporters working full-time at the Massachusetts State House. If you could find 5 or 6 now, good luck. But most all of those came from these newspapers, which were, I was Metro editor in the 90s, and I have to I felt like I was under siege part of the time from all the stories that we got beaten on in the suburbs. Virtually, I want to say these reporters at the State House worked for dominant dailies in communities like Lynn, Salem, Lawrence, Lowell, Framingham, Brockton, New Bedford, Fall River, and Quincy. And I didn't hit them all. The bulk of those newspapers are now owned by Gannett or Alden Global Capital. Enough said. People in Massachusetts once had more journalism available. They've lost more. They have grieved more. They have hungered for what they had. And so they now have been quick to embrace a rebirth of journalism that matters. Don't mistake me for a combatant in the trenches of nonprofit journalism. I'm just a board member at the New Bedford Light, and I'm advising the Plymouth Independent, which will begin publishing in another month or so. But it has been invigorating to see what the Light has done in just 28 months. Before June 2021, there was no journalism of consequence in a city of 100,000. Now, the Light's news staff of 12 regularly breaks stories about lapses in public safety, real estate seizures by private investors, the large number of homes that get their water through lead pipes, the chicanery of the city council, and even the hidden ownership of much of the fishing fleet by a Dutch hedge fund. Government agencies are under the microscope, and voters now have reliable, nonpartisan journalism they can use to cast intelligent votes. But my colleagues from the Light, who will be on the panel, will have much more to say. Leanne Kamara, who the Light announced today is our new CEO, and our editor, Andy Tomalonis. Let me find my place here. In New Bedford, the light is closing in on $4 million raised in 28 months. In Plymouth, when word got out last spring that the Independent was getting ready to publish, and we're still getting ready, more than $200,000 quickly flooded in over the transom. And we haven't published a word yet. Mark Pothier, who left a senior editing position at the Globe to be CEO and editor of the Plymouth Independent, is here with us today. Not too long ago, philanthropic dollars routinely and reliably flowed to important community institutions like museums, hospitals, maybe the local Philharmonic. After all we've been through, it has been increasingly obvious that our civic health needs the sustenance that nonprofit news sites increasingly provide. So if you brought along your checkbook or credit card, now is the time to get them out. For me, and I suspect for many of you, the explosive growth in nonprofit news outlets has been nothing short of exhilarating. We now have the will and the means to expand this pro-democracy movement. So let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. That was just wonderful. Between mics here again. So I am going to ask our teams from Newton and New Bedford to come on up and join us, and I'll do some intros while we have that underway and they're finding their way to the front. So from Newton, we have teams from each of these two communities, a board member or civic leader and the editor. That's good because you're seeing both sides of the partnerships and pairings that are making all of these news organizations work. From Newton, we're joined by Howard Shulkin, who is a marketing and corporate communications pro. He's a lifelong Newton resident who advances civic life in all kinds of ways. He serves on the boards of Newton Community Pride, the Boston Entrepreneurs Network, and Temple Shalom of Newton, and now the Beacon Board, also drawing on his past media experience. He was a news producer at WCVB TV here in Boston. Brian McGonigal is his editor, bringing 2 decades of award-winning journalism experience to his work as editor of the Beacon. He's covered local, state, national news for publications including the Eagle Tribune, Patch.com, freelance for magazines, and was the Massachusetts State House reporter for Gannett USA Today's network. From New Bedford, in addition to Robbie, who just addressed us, Leanne Camera, newly named CEO, hurrah, really exemplifies how civic and nonprofit leaders in many fields are now building their communities through nonprofit newsrooms. Leanne brings more than 20 years of experience in nonprofits as a senior executive into this news space in planning and strategy and building stakeholder consensus. For 11 years, she operated a community health center consulting firm, which secured more than $76 million in funding for clients. Now she's back near her birthplace and driving the growth of the light. And we're aiming for 76 million, right?
Yes, we are.
Excellent.
80, it's actually.
All right. Andy is editor of The Light, another award-winning journalist. Massachusetts is very rich in the editorial talent here. Andy has worked at the Boston Herald, the New York Post, the Metro West News, the Cape Cod Times, and most recently was managing editor for the Standard Times of New Bedford. That's part of the Gannett Gatehouse Group, which we referenced earlier. That's a publicly traded newspaper company that has cut coverage drastically in many communities, given the digital shift in news. And after this group, we also will be joined by 2 civic leaders bringing the perspective on why news startups are happening in a in a metro area as well. But let's start with those of you from Newton. And Howard, I wanted to start with you. The Beacon began publishing in 2022. How did you get to that point? How did you build community support? How did it get started and take shape in the community?
Well, actually, there was a community meeting in 2022, which I attended. It was almost 2 years ago. And that's where the momentum began to do something and publish in 2023. So in March, because of an override, it was decided by the board, which I hadn't joined by that time, that it would be a good time to test the waters and do a series of articles about the override. And so we did that.
Mhm.
And then the board went into the mode of, okay, we proved concept, we've raised tens of thousands of dollars. What do we need to do next? And that's hire a full-time reporter, editor, paid. And so that happened in the early summer. So we've really ramped up the coverage. And I joined the board in April. The board is made up of 9 people with very different experiences and professional work. I'd say lawyers win the way because there are a few of those. But about half of my career, I've been involved with either journalism or marketing communications with a tech trade company. So half of my career, I've been exposed to journalism. And now we're getting full force ahead to do fundraising for the fall and hope to double the kind of money that we've raised to this point with a relatively few number of stories at this point.
How did you tell us a little bit about that initial fundraising? How did you explain to the community, or how did the community come together in that initial meeting to say we need this, and more importantly, we'll support it financially?
Well, in 2022 was the beginning shot. And then there was a small group of people who kept working at it in 2022 into 2023. And they really did a lot of the fundraising, again, before I joined the group. But through outreach to friends, family, and also through the publications of stories in March, the money started coming in. An interesting story is after March, we had a few month quiet period. And at one point we sent out an email to a subscriber base of about 10,000 people to let them know that we're working on hiring an editor, stay tuned. There was no pitch for more money. And just that email, and then the subsequent email several weeks later that we hired an editor, we got several $1,000s in donations. So there's really is a hunger out there for people to get regular news about their community.
That's great. How did you decide in those early stages to form as a nonprofit versus a for-profit? And do you think it makes any difference in how you're perceived in the community?
That was a little bit before my time, but I believe the effort was, we felt that would be the most successful path to starting, because as a nonprofit, obviously you can solicit donations and eventually grants and hopefully corporate sponsorships. And I'm not sure the group was willing to start kicking off a whole for-profit with advertising and all the other requirements that may be a little bit more difficult.
Thanks. Brian, let's talk from an editorial standpoint. Tell me about, what do you think has been the most significant coverage so far?
In Newton,
Mm-hmm.
the MBTA Communities Act, which is making MBTA line communities upzone their neighborhoods around T stops and commuter stops. That's been kind of a big deal because Newton has how many, 9?
But yeah,
Stops?
there are 9 stops plus bus.
Yeah, so that's been getting a lot of attention, and that has to be voted on by New Year's Eve. That and the schools, Newton currently has a big battle going on between the teachers and the school committee that's gotten really public. And interestingly enough, my town I previously covered for 12 years that never had any issues with their schools. Now they're in the same boat. And I'm seeing it's happening everywhere, and it seems to be a trend in public
It's
education
a
this year.
contract issue.
Yeah, it's like a contract issue of future pay increases. But so schools and zoning and infrastructure, the stuff that's kind of always been important to people that the big companies kind of started not paying attention to any longer. That's so people like.
How did you decide, and how do you decide on an ongoing basis without endless resources? Those are clearly big issues. Do you have
Yeah.
to pick and choose on others? How do you get input from the community?
Well, my email is nice and full each and every evening with suggestions, which I actually like because it's better than silence. So people have let me know and have because I didn't really know a lot about Newton
Yeah.
starting fresh, and so the board members told me what they thought the big issues were, and they were correct for the most part. But yeah, the community has let me know, and it's I'm happy that they're so engaged already. They're kind of emailing and texting me saying like this is coming up. So yeah, the readers let you know.
How do you talk back to them? That didn't come out the right way. How do you communicate back to them? Yeah, we're going to cover this. No, we're not. We're planning this.
I just like a normal person. I just kind of have a I have a conversation. I mean, somebody asked me, we're doing candidate profiles, and somebody asked me why I published this person's before this other person's because this person doesn't have an opponent. And I was just plainly said, honestly, my freelancers, as they're coming in, I'm posting them. I hadn't thought of that, but you're right. Maybe I should, and having a conversation and talking and saying, what would you suggest? I mean, this is a new paper. There are people that used to ask to a newspaper asking for suggestions, and people like that. When I worked for Gannett, I'd probably be fired for asking the readers to dictate what the content is. But I like that. I've had many conversations with people via email. It's always fun at events like at the Harvest Fair last weekend when I see them in face to face, and they're like, me, we've been talking for a week. So it's the people let you know.
I know you. For those of you who aren't in the news world, what's reflected here might be more of a change than you realize. Small town news, everybody always knows the publisher, the editor, but in a lot of news media, news has set itself apart, and editors haven't necessarily been accessible to their community or had that back and forth. While the coverage decisions are independent, asking for the community's input is something that's just sweeping journalism as a real change in the kind of relationship between the press and the public. Brian, continuing on this, a lot of studies by Pew and others show that trust in journalism, as in so many institutions, has really fallen over the years, particularly with national news. As Nancy referenced, it's rebuilding in local news. How do you think about trust? You've already addressed you're accessible, you talk like a normal person. How do you think the Beacon, is it rebuilding trust in news? Is it rebuilding a community connection? And how do you think about that?
I think it is just, I've been doing this since June, but just speaking with people, I notice people will come to me with a concern and they're very guarded. And if you just talk to them and kind of give them your kind of viewpoint and get their viewpoint and have a conversation, eventually, like yesterday, I went and interviewed a candidate who is running for city council. He had met us at a pop-up event and was really suspicious and really distrustful. I went there yesterday to just do a story on him like I did for everybody else. And the conversation, he was a little bit guarded, but his dog ended up loving me, so he ended up liking me. And the dog wouldn't leave me alone, so he was yelling at the dog, and I might even put that in the story. But it's like just and then we talked further and further, and everyone who had told me in town that he was a little bit gruff or like, oh, he'd stand up. Well, I found out, his wife had passed away last spring. So we were talking, about that. And it was actually, I think you get, when people see that there's a human being writing the news and not, these hedge fund run big companies, they trust. People tend to trust their local reporter. In every job I've been in, they would be nice to me and tell me how much they hated my newspaper, because and so now as an editor who's also out in the community, I have that opportunity to kind of make that the connection. This week after what happened in Israel, I put a thing up, a post up about how the police were monitoring safety, but everything was fine. Somebody had an issue with the way I worded something in a sentence. It's a sensitive topic. I didn't get defensive though. I talked and I said, that's right. That's not the point that I was making. I'll make a change. And it de-escalated. She wasn't as angry. And now it turns out that she is, I found out she's an Israeli who lived in Gaza and married a Palestinian. So, and now I'm trying to get maybe do a sit down interview for that angle. This woman who I met out of her anger, and within a couple of emails back and forth, we realized, misunderstanding was more like it. And so I think it's just, you do it one email, one meeting, one story at a time, just like they did 200 years ago when the newspaper started,
Howie, you're a comms pro. How do you look at this issue of building trust and the community connection?
Well, one of the things I want to do is be out in the community. Brian mentioned about a pop-up. He and I have gone to a couple of farmers markets. Last weekend, we had a harvest fair. And I was surprised at how many people said, oh yeah, I know the Beacon, I've signed up. Or I tell them, please sign up. You'll get a notice when a story is posted. So I think it is different than national politics. It's much different. I don't think people come with a lot of suspicion or Democrat or Republican. Of course, we're in a part of the world where there isn't quite as much factions as there are in other parts. So I think we've been well received. Sometimes Brian tells me he's surprised when he calls someone to do an interview because they didn't know that there was any media in Newton. That we had a period of time where the newspaper disappeared and there wasn't a lot of information except social media like Nextdoor and things like that. So now I think he's being greeted generally positively, that there is someone interested in a story and interested in communicating to the rest of the community.
Right.
If I could just add that when I started, I was actually impressed at how much legwork the board had done, because my first week people were like anticipating meeting someone from the Beacon, so I didn't have to like start it from scratch. As far as like getting out in the community, it was sort of out and about already, so I could actually do my job and call people.
Yeah, when Brian started, there were more than 400 donors to Newton Beacon, and the solicitation didn't begin a lot before last year.
Terrific. Leanne, I'm going to jump to you in New Bedford. And one of the reasons we're talking so much about money in a meeting about journalism is it's the challenge of our time in journalism. How do we support this thing that's a public good more than a commercial business now? And that's really changing things. Leanne, New Bedford started with an individual backer, correct? You had one major backer to begin with and then have broadened, is that?
We had two major backers. One of the major backers, it was essentially a 3-year commitment, whereas the one was just a 1-year commitment. But within that first year, there were really two who gave equally, and that comprised almost 50% of the year one budget. Yeah.
And then, so how have you built on that? I will say when we look at risk factors for nonprofit startups, it's often not the bootstrapped ones. It's the ones that get a chunk of change and then, think it'll be renewed or don't start fundraising the very next day to broaden it, that sometimes run into challenges 2 or 3 years in. So you guys have used that as a springboard. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that we're immune to that challenge. Raising revenue, there's no permanent solution. It's a constant. Somebody does, decide they want to phase out, they need to be replaced, and then that replacement wants to phase out and you got to find somebody else. So it's just a constant effort. But I would say, equally important to those two large donors the first year, and then the one did continue for 3 years. But equally important was that we had this anonymous donor who gave us a $100,000 gift, but it was structured as a match. And the purpose was to prioritize broad-based community support. So it was structured, the match structure was such that small donors were matched 3-to-1 and large donors were matched 1-to-1. And that really, really helped just kind of build, a broader community investment into the light. And we've been able to repeat that anonymous donor match 3 years now. So yeah, I think that was really a significant piece. And so far we have about 1,400 donors. So yeah, does that answer the question?
Thanks. Yes. And I will tell you, for anyone who wants to pick up materials, we have handouts over here about Newsmatch, which is an end of year campaign that virtually all these startups in Massachusetts and elsewhere have leveraged. It is national foundations and increasingly community foundations, state foundations, topic-based, who put up a match for individual donations. This whole idea of a community of individuals supporting the news is pretty new to all of us, right? We're used to, we might subscribe, but that's been most of media has been largely supported by advertising. So these match programs are incredibly powerful in incentivizing people that, oh yeah, I'll step up. I want this kind of news. So I'm delighted to hear of your experience in that. What do you find resonates in the community that inspires people to give? I mean, the match may be the catalyst, but what is getting them excited about doing this?
I would say that the community response to the light, our founding editor who isn't here, she's vacationing in Arizona, but she says she's never experienced a community appreciation. Normally journalists are not always well received. People are suspicious, may not really like you, but don't like the newspaper. And that really wasn't the case when the New Bedford Light started. People were so desperate for local news. We were well received. I joined the organization about 8 months after its launch. But those are the stories I hear. I also know there was very much a deliberate effort on the editorial side. Angie, the editor, can talk about this more, but the motto of the newsroom that the founding editor kind of instilled in everybody is that we investigate issues and we celebrate arts and culture. And arts and culture really allowed us to cross populations, hit different pockets of the community, so that we were reflecting, a positive image of the community. And New Bedford, for those of you who aren't familiar, sort of has a chip on its shoulder. It's been called the armpit of Massachusetts, among lots of other things. So yeah, we had a really positive community response because they were so desperate, and because I think of also some of our efforts, the editorial side, but then on the non-editorial side, we have a position that is focused on community engagement, director of community engagement. We hold Meet the Reporter events at local restaurants. We move around every other month so that people can engage with us. We also have an advisory council. It's common in nonprofits, but I don't know how common it is in the nonprofit journalism world, but it's non-voting members. So it's not a board. They don't have any specific authority, but it allows us to kind of deepen the relationship with the community and pull in, other members of the community who we can't fit everybody on the board, but it still allows us to reach out to a new group. It's about 40 members. They champion the light within their respective networks and in their neighborhoods, and they provide guidance and advice to us. It's a fairly new group of individuals for us. We just started our advisory council about 6 months ago. And yeah, our director of community engagement, in addition to organizing Meet the Reporters, New Bedford has a significant Cape Verdean population. It's part of New Bedford's history. We walk in the Cape Verdean parade. We are, every third Thursday of the month, there's a city celebration called AHA. We'll be tabling, at about, half of those throughout the year. We really do put a lot of deliberate attention and effort into having increased visibility in the community.
Great. Andy, can you kind of carry on and talk a little more about how you're mixing? I'm intrigued by this mix of arts and culture to include the community, which your founding editor also combined with, talked about the Lights coverage as strong, ferociously independent, and that people initially didn't think you'd be nonpartisan, but now do. Talk about how the mix of coverage, how you involve and also stay independent.
Well, I think for the arts and culture and entertainment, we have a really well curated calendar, and our goal was to make it the best calendar in the region, so that anybody who wants to find what's going on can open it up. And every day we have, every week we have a calendar of best bets. But a lot of that is just, it's sort of celebrating so many different artists that are in New Bedford, the art galleries, art shows, any new thing that comes up, we get it in the calendar. And we really worked hard. We hired a designated calendar editor to just look at that and build a calendar slowly to make contacts with people. And so it's not just, taking it, a press release, smattering that we get and passively calling that our arts coverage. We really reach out to the arts community. And we do that with some features too. So one of the ways that we stay independent, and we're more of a watchdog kind of editorial department, that we really look and dig deep into stories. But we'll also do some features, and we do an in-person feature that tries to sort of get beyond, the basics of what somebody's doing. But when we find an artist who's done something incredible, we will feature them as a story. We'll also do videos. We have a new video feature that we have. It's Art Talks, and every month we have a photographer who goes and takes a photo gallery and does a video of a person who's an artist now. And then and we also have a short story. So it's it's triple layer coverage of multimedia with stories. And we also just tend to cover arts centered stories, and I'll get to that when I talk about some of the big stories that we've broken this year. If you want, you
Go ahead. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
So for years, New Bedford has built itself as a really big arts community, and it's developed an arts community. It's been held up as a model around around the state and elsewhere for developing this culture. And one of the key things that they did was, about 23 years ago, they found an old an old department store building, the Star Store, and they managed to refurbish it with kilns and bring fine art students from the university to downtown New Bedford. And so there was a culture that was building over 20 years. Artists bring more artists. Their artwork, fosters the opening of galleries. There's just young people walking around in the downtown area. It builds businesses, eclectic businesses, like you walk around here and you see all the coffee shops and that. So that all was slowly building. And last year we heard that the curriculum was changing at UMass Dartmouth, which runs the art store, the Star Store School. And so we heard that they were phasing out a lot of their fine arts programs. So we did stories and columns on it about, I'd say about April and May of last year. And we were assured by the university that the Star Store was a key part of their, and they were going to keep it going in New Bedford. And it turns out this fall, about late August, the chancellor for UMass Dartmouth sent a letter to staff and faculty and students saying that they were closing the Star Store. So after 20 years of building this, this bond with the downtown area, they closed the Star Store, and the students really didn't have another place to go. These were students that had been attracted from, other areas of the country, some foreign students who came for the specific programs, the Masters of Fine Arts that were available through UMass Dartmouth. So the students are still without a classroom. So, they closed this, they opened up what they were going to have as a campus in a closed Bed and Bath and Beyond store in a strip mall. And so they had to refurbish it, but they found it wasn't good enough to work with the gas-fired kilns that were available. And they can't use, the ventilation isn't right, so they can't use oil paints. So the students are now being scattered around to different parts of the UMass campus where they can't really be accommodated. And there's just this sort of sense of loss in New Bedford of what's happened to our arts community, sort of the hub of like, it's like a generation, it generates an incubator for artists in New Bedford, the Star Store was. So that's gone. It's been closed since September 1st. The students don't have studios. All their equipment is stored. And we've been just hammering away at this story, trying to find out why, what happened, how did the deal go down? Why didn't they exercise the option to buy this building for $1 when they could? And when we run into walls, the UMass Building Committee and a state DCAM that tells us we can only talk to somebody through a public records request. They don't do interviews. So it's been really difficult to get this information. But we had one columnist who's very dogged at trying to do that. And he's uncovered a lot, and we've followed with news stories. And it's just, there's no conclusion to the story yet, but once we get our teeth into something, we're like a bulldog. We don't let go, and so we're continuing to write story after story about it. And we think it's gonna, at least everybody is going to know what happened when, and how it happened, and whether the UMass Dartmouth, which says they want to build, they want to keep the campus in New Bedford, really wanted it there. And whether the landlord, who was paid a lot of money to keep the maintenance and upkeep of the building, whether he shirked that duty and ignored the upkeep and kept the money. So there were millions of dollars of taxpayers' money that went into this, and we're digging and we haven't stopped digging. But that's the kind of story that I think earns us respect in the arts community as a news. We're fighting, we're fighting the battles for them. And at the same time, we're, showcasing the art in the community. So that kind of story, the hard news, dogged pursuit that we have, is really our, that's our brand. We really dig at stories, and we've done it in the fishing industry. We've done it with takeovers of people coming in, investors coming in and buying up huge apartment buildings, evicting the tenants and saying that they're going to triple the rent after they, renovate the apartments. And with rail coming to New Bedford, there's a whole, worries about gentrification and, neighbors and people in New Bedford being priced out of their homes. So we've covered that as a, over and over and over again with repeated stories about that issue. We've covered the fishing industry the same way. We're covering the offshore wind industry the same way, whether the offshore wind is going to be harmful to the fishing industry. We ask a lot of questions like that, and we sometimes get criticism for it, but we stick to our guns and really push hard on these big stories.
I would say the people of New Bedford are very fortunate to have your coverage. That there have been a lot of studies that have shown where local news exists, more people run for office, there are higher voting rates, lower debt. Question for both you, Andy, and for Brian, how are you thinking of election coverage and voting coverage? What are you doing now? What are you thinking about looking at in the future, either in events or coverage? Andy, let's start with you and then go to Brian.
So we've pursued elections with great fervor and zeal, and come, with a lot of coverage for a single ward race. It was a special election. There were 8 candidates running, and we got behind them, did individual profiles. And then our columnist went and walked around the neighborhoods with where all of these people lived in the ward to decide what could we do about this eyesore? How could we improve that? And we finished with just what we thought was really thoughtful coverage, just great in-depth coverage, who all these candidates were, what made them tick, why'd they come out. And I'm sad to say that it was like 6% voter turnout. And
Oh,
it just hurt so much. So,
Mhm.
you know, and so we are still pushing ahead with zeal for our coverage of this election. There are not as many open races, you know, where we have competing candidates, but we're covering an at-large city council race, one ward race, and a mayoral race where, you know, the person who is lined up and won the preliminary election isn't really a viable candidate. He has a campaign war chest of about $75. And when he ran last year, the other local, the local paper, the Standard Times, the Gannett paper, actually did a very good story challenging him on some of the claims he made on his resume and found they were, you know, great exaggerations. So this person isn't a serious candidate. So without a big mayoral race, you know, you're left to city council, and we're pushing really hard. We're doing profiles, you know, invited profiles where I sent all the candidates questionnaires that were of interest to the people of New Bedford. And as well, we have a city hall reporter who's going around and doing profiles of the candidates. And we'll cover the election night. We covered the preliminary election with the special election page. So it's all a part. And, you know, it's that civic duty that you really feel you got to inform the voters. So when you get knocked down by seeing only 6% turnout, we have to remain undaunted and continue the fight. Yes, did you have a question? Okay. All right.
Right?
So Newton's having an election, and I am also doing profiles on all the candidates. It's a little daunting because Newton has the biggest city council, I think, in the galaxy. I don't know if people are aware they have 24 seats on their city council. But it's been fun getting to know, because you get a variety of people. But I've been sitting down with person after person. It's like the guy yesterday whose dog fell in love with me. That he's running for city council. I mean, it's been busy. I'll be glad when the election's over. But I find that it shows the audience who these people are. If how come they decided to race to enter? What do they? What is their career? How does that kind of translate into, you know, finding that thing about them that makes them, you know, that candidate? And it's been successful. The preliminary elections, I just sat up and obviously I didn't call each, you know, 24 city council people, but you know, updating the results and
Well, you got to provide perspective. Of those 24 seats,
yeah,
only a few were contested in the preliminary election.
yeah,
In the final election, there are only 6
Yeah.
seats that are contested, and the entire school committee is uncontested, all 6 or 7 candidates, no opposition whatsoever.
right.
And that may highlight the lack of local news to stimulate candidates to consider running for an office.
Yeah, so like yeah, so we have not like Howard said, not all 24 seats have a contest. I wouldn't be here today if they did, but there is we have like debates, you know, there's, I mean, you have endorsements, the usual local kind of election coverage that you're used to seeing that's kind of gone away in recent years. We're trying to just bring it back, you know. This somebody announces a candidacy, you say who are they, what makes them tick, you show them who they are, and
Brian also writes stories that talk about the person as a human,
mm,
as well as positions on various hot button issues. And I think that also helps people get a feeling for who they're voting for.
well, one example we have, Newton has the first transgender city council member in the state, and so I saw her at the Harvest Fair last weekend, and she came over and thanked me for making the article about bread and butter issues like potholes and you know, zoning and everything, because one of her complaints about the coverage was that it was always, look at this transgender person running for office, instead of like, look at this person who ran for office who happens to also be transgender. When you change that, just that kind of change in that narrative, it kind of, it doesn't just humanize the person, it kind of it changes how people perceive their elected officials, where you see them as, when people ask how, and when I asked, I said, okay, how did you do it? She said, quite bluntly, I just campaigned on potholes, and it's bread and butter
Right.
issues. And so I guess that showing
Mhm.
showing who the people are, and also drinking a lot of coffee and staying on top of it election night, because those numbers come in fast.
And what also is happening is in our young life, a member of our editorial council, we have a board and we have an editorial council. The council is made up of former journalists who can help us with stories and can also maybe help deflect some of the incoming rockets that head toward Brian if it's a contentious issue and someone has a real problem. And one of our editorial council members moderated a candidates forum. And recently, we've been asked to join several organizations to help moderate what I call a speed dating for candidates, where they're going to have as many candidates who want to participate, and residents will go from one candidate to the other, and then they want Beacon and others to help moderate those discussions so they don't go off the rails or get dominated by one person or another. So there's a awakening that there is a media organization in town that can help with elections and with forums such as the one I described.
A question for any of you. Are you doing anything with the local high schools or thinking about doing anything with the schools? You talked about engaging.
We just actually last night worked out an agreement with Boston College. We're gonna they have a really good independent school newspaper, and so we're gonna kind of give them a section on our homepage where we can put their stuff on there to give them a platform, and they're really excited. We're gonna start doing that, and probably actually the week after.
Yeah, and we'll choose which stories. Some will have more broad Newton appeal than others. It also is tied to a summer internship for a BC student in the summer. And I think I've been trying to think of what are some of the big challenges with any publication, and I have it: coin, collaboration, and content. And a lot of things fall out from those three broad categories. And so bringing in the BC Heights to add to the content. I have in my own mind that it'd be great to share content with Newton, Wellesley, Brookline, surrounding communities, because we share some of the same issues. And there are regional stories that should be shared with those communities.
And so we have a very robust internship program. We had 10 interns this year in the summer.
Wow.
So it was pretty big. And these some of them were high school students, and
Yeah.
a lot of them were in the transition. They had graduated from high school and were going to their first year in college. So a few of them we sort of did sort them out, and a few of them were experienced enough to write some small shorter features for the paper, but most of them we employed in these one seasonal video package. And so they went out and did a story, a Gen X on Gen X, and they just asked questions. What are you afraid of the future? And really interviewed a lot of people. What do you think about artificial intelligence? Is that going to take over, the way things go? So we had 10 interns paired up together, one asking questions, the other working the camera. And they went out for almost the entirety of the summer and came back with their footage, and we edited them into five videos about, long form videos, about 8 to 10 minutes each. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that on the website. Yes, we pay the internships an hourly rate as we would with, yeah. So
Ours is paid as well.
And also with the to clarify, with the BC, their paper has a Newton Metro section, so that's what we're going to be. So rather than kind of double coverage of the same thing, we're collaborating on, we're going to be using their Newton stuff, giving them space on our page for that. It also avoids, double teaming the same local issue.
I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you guys a question, and that'll kind of lead into our next panelists as well. How do you think about the newspaper or the news site, excuse me, in the sense of community development and economic development? And how does the local business community support you? Unsure, what's that relationship?
Well, as support goes, we're going to find out soon because we need to spin up a corporate sponsorship program. Right now, it's purely donations. And as I said, several hundred donors at this point. But it's a three-legged stool for donors, sponsors, and grants. And we're working on the grants and the donors. Next is corporate sponsors.
The Light also has a business sponsorship program. It may not be quite so formalized, although we do have tiers and benefits that come depending on the contribution level. We didn't go the advertising route. We're not sure that New Bedford really has an advertising base. So we went the sponsorship route. It avoids tax complications. And really we wanted to have them invested in our mission and not on like a return on investment and clicks because, we wouldn't necessarily be competitive, in that type of scenario in a very metrics focused advertising perspective. So we also do a business sponsorship model, and it's had some successes. It's sort of plateaued, I would say. We've got to really, look at it again, reconsider, see what we can do. But yeah, we do really very much want to always frame it as an investment in our mission and not a priority on logo placement and name mentions. So it's just philanthropy through by a business, by a local business or corporation.
I would say that's encouraging for those of you who may wonder. In local news nonprofits, advertising is running about 26, 27% of revenue. And I shouldn't say that's all. It is more sponsorship underwriting in general because it's usually a smaller audience. This isn't like programmatic click-through advertising that you may see on other types of sites, but it is proving to be a significant leg of the stool. So applaud you for that. We are going to make a slight shift change here. I am going to ask the four of you to stay close because we will come back with questions. But rather than having all six panelists essentially sit in each other's laps for an hour, we're going to ask you go ahead and relax. And Geeta and Greg, if we could have you come on up and swap out, and then we'll all be available for Q&A. So a couple of introductions while they are getting settled in. Geeta really represents a community supporter before a news outlet has launched or while a community is figuring out where it could go, what it can develop in news. She is the president of the Cambridge Community Foundation, which she has really converted from a grant-making organization into a much broader local giving platform in support of, I love how you word it, the community's shared prosperity, social equity, and cultural richness. Geeta has underwritten a marketing study to determine if a nonprofit solution or some other solution can help strengthen Cambridge's local news here as a way to build and connect the whole community. We also are joined by Greg Ball, who is a cultural curator, a journalist himself, and content creator. He's also the director of digital strategy and production at Embrace Boston. That's a nonprofit initiative of the Boston Foundation that works to dismantle structural racism through arts and culture, community, research, and policy. Greg also is a board member of BINGE, the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism. Several of you are here from BINGE today. BINGE is a network of local nonprofit news outlets serving communities within Boston in ways that other media don't really, and they have launched their own news site as well this last year. Greg initially got involved with BINGE as the founder of KBX Media, a digital editorial platform and media content creation agency. So I was thrilled that they could join us because this whole issue of thinking about news not as then an end in itself, but news as a means to an end and building community. I was really hoping you can talk about that, and not just in distinct communities like Newton and New Bedford, but Cambridge is distinct, but also within this bigger Boston area, and the same in the overall metro area. So Gita, when you and I chatted last week, you talked about Cambridge as that you have this mix of challenges in different parts of the community. You have really global citizens attached to all these universities who may not all be all that connected to the local community. A lot of millennials, individuals, families who moved here from somewhere else might also not be the lifelong resident in terms of getting involved. And then 1 in 7 here, I think you said, needs to rely on food banks. This isn't a wealthy community. Parts of it are incredibly. So you're seeing is there a way for news to pull all these together? Can you just talk about that? What
Yeah,
you hope
sure,
for, what you envision?
So first of all, I want to say amazing and inspiring to hear all the work that you have done. It really sort of resonated a lot with how we've been thinking about the community and how this amazing group of engaged citizens, some of whom are sitting right here, actually launched this effort when our local news was, about to go out completely. And I think it's important to the foundation because Cambridge is such an interesting place. It is a global hub of innovation. It's a university town. It is a central city where lots of people come in from outside of Cambridge for services because Cambridge provides really good services. And it's this quirky little town where the first thing I heard about Cambridge when I came into work here was that it's the People's Republic of Cambridge, and everyone has an opinion, and every opinion is right. So that's Cambridge for you. And and also I think there is this myth about Cambridge that it's a prosperous city. Yes, it is a prosperous city, but 1 in 8 residents don't have enough to eat. Our children are sort of divided into in poverty or in wealth. Our elders are in poverty or in wealth. So it's a city of contrast in some ways. And when you have that kind of a contrast, you have a city that is pulled apart. There isn't anything that unites. And we've been trying to play the part as a foundation, but really what we need is that local news. And the local effort that our civic leaders actually have pulled together are actually really there. They've talked to lots of people. It's still in process, so all the results are not out. But all the interviews and surveys are showing the absolute thirst and hunger for local news. Political coverage, coverage about schools and what's happening in schools, coverage stories about what's happening in communities, understanding of different neighborhoods, because we're a city of neighborhoods, and some are largely minority neighborhoods and some are largely majority neighborhoods. So it's really, I think people are really looking for that a trusted place of information. I also feel that there is this feeling of wanting to connect locally in a world where the chaos of the world is so out of our controls that we feel the need to have that local social cohesion, that local connection. So with that, I'm let you talk, and I'm sure there'll be other things to say.
Greg, can you kind of address the same themes and how you approach news in the community?
and
Your
the
home
well, the
school?
value of news and why it's so important. I
Yeah.
think that really the key part of it is, in order to make change in the world, you have to have an informed group of people to be able to kind of look at the issues. And I think that we've seen over the last few years how there's basically an attack on those information systems, on the ability for people to have the information that's necessary for us to make choices that some folks don't want us to make. So, that's kind of what makes independent news so important, because as we see, major newsrooms get gutted, that undermines the ability of those stories to get told. And the independent news now becomes almost the farm system for building those journalists, but also those stories. Some of those larger operations now are looking towards independent outlets to be able to pull those next big stories. So that foundational work is getting done no longer in those large newsrooms in the same way that's being done in the independent space. So I think that's the essential part of the work that's being done. Is why it's so important. As that revenue model, as that business model changes, we have to adapt to it, and we have to get smart about making those things happen. And I think we're in a unique opportunity. I trust me, I'm not happy about the state of affairs, but I also have a lot of faith in rooms like like people in the folks in this room today, in this room today, the ability to kind of to lead that charge and make that change. So
I recall you told me you first got involved with Binge when you founded Killer Boombox to cover
Yeah.
hip hop and rap that just wasn't covered in the local arts press and scene. And you also talked about this intersection we as journalists all struggle with, of that kind of rigor that the panelists have talked about, but also that people who are younger than most of us in this room may not be looking for the same long article or in the same format. You talked about how we're really competing not with other news media, but with TMZ or entertainment or TikTok.
yeah.
And that if we have to marry the values of our journalism with some more razzle dazzle and some more personality, really. And so I wanted to ask you about that. How do you see that evolving? How do you see journalism evolving?
Well, I mean, I will tell you that when we started Killer Boombox, and we got involved with Binge was essential to kind of our growth. And our relationship with Binge was, like most good things, started over a beer. Chris and I have known each other for about 100 years, and most of our conversations started in the back of the Middle East, arguing about hip hop. And as I grew Killer Boombox, and as I started to grow Killer Boombox, one of the first things that I wanted to do was to lean in to covering the artists that I thought were important, that were here locally, that I felt had something special. And as big as Boston is, as important as it is to the ecosystem of music, many times locally we get overlooked. And I wanted us to be able to create a mechanism to be able to kind of to bring those artists to light. And part of our approach with that was a series that we did called Around My Way, that was funded through our work with Binge. And it allowed me to create a podcast episode, a feature-length article of like 1,000 to 1,500 words, and a video piece to go with it as well. And so when we talk about the thinking of outside the box, I knew that that every kid that loves hip hop is not going to sit down and read 1,000 of my eloquent words that I write. And I knew that there's some people who are going to sit there and they want to hear the conversation. They're engaged in hearing people have the debate. And then I also knew that some people were going to be really quite honestly intrigued by the visual piece of it as well. So I knew that if we can attack this one story, but from these three different approaches, and then also through social media with some of those components and the pictures and things like that. So if we can approach this one story on this person, we have these multiple channels that we'll be able to connect with people for. So for us, it's like understanding the landscape. How do you as a small organization connect with people who are being inundated with information on a regular basis, and how do you give, how do you get people to eat their vegetables when everybody's, eating McDonald's on a regular basis? So, you figure out how McDonald's does that packaging. You want to put an orange package? All right, orange it is. Let's go. But at the same time, when you get to it, you still have the substance that we're looking for, and that that's one of the things that I'm proudest of the work that we've done together, and that is actually something as we're looking forward to the future, that we're going to be relaunching it with a whole bunch of new artists. Like we're super excited about what the future holds. So.
Great. I think we need to pair you with Andy and get that 6% voting rate.
We'll figure that out.
Yeah.
If you're ready to do some TikTok videos, we're gonna figure. There we go.
So let me ask you, in that work, if you cast ahead in 5 or 10 years, like, how does Boston look different because of your work through Killer Boombox, through Binge, serving on the board? How does this media world look different, and how does the community look different?
I think that's something we're all trying to figure out together. I can't be the one person like, this is what we're going to do, y'all. But I think the key part of it is that we're leaning into the various channels of delivery. So I don't think the need for the information that we are able to kind of to gather, and the importance of the news that we're able to put together, that the need for that has not changed. I think the delivery system is what has changed. It's the ability to kind of be innovative and nimble in how do we get that word out. So again, we may enjoy a 1,000-word article, but how do we take that 1,000-word article and turn it into somebody who's reading the news on TikTok every day? Who that may be the way that somebody gets that information. How do we pair somebody who's of a journalistic background with somebody who has the ability to create engaging visuals? Like, those are the pieces. So I think going forward, you're going to see more and more people lean into that space, lean into the various channels. Like, I think the key thing that is super important to me is like really keeping the foundation of just good, strong information, but pairing it with new ways of delivery. Just like, that's the key part. It's just like, how do we meet the people where they're at as opposed to where we want them to go?
And Geeta, you're planting this seed.
Yes.
What do you hope comes out of the marketing study in the near term, first of all, and then we'll talk long term?
Yeah, I think it's essentially getting the endorsement, which I think we are already hearing from a lot of people about the importance and the value of local news, hyper local news. It's not just, it's things that help people make decisions. It's things that help inform people. It's things that hold our public sector, our elected officials accountable. People are, there is no source of information about this. Decisions are made, and reporting typically tends to be after the fact. So you have a report that will come out and say this decision was made. I think a very good example in Cambridge has been at the issue of bikes over parking, where bike lanes were laid out. 55 million was set aside for bike lanes, and after the fact, when that happened, a lot of the local businesses started to write about, speak up about this and reach out to city council members about how the loss of parking had hurt their business and how they were closing down businesses. And I think the value and the role of local, hyper-local information and news media is that it is about the deepening of democracy, largely. It is about the information that you need to make decisions about your day-to-day life. It is about hearing those wonderful stories that make you feel good about your community. It's about knowing the trends that are going to possibly lead to problems so that you can intervene and do something about it. So when I look at it from a citizenry point of view or the resident point of view, that our hope is that this effort will actually lead to the decision to be able to hold a local newspaper that has integrity, that has accountability, that is non-biased, that is a reliable source of information about a lot of things. I mean, I love some of the wonderful things that New Bedford is showing, the best bets in the community, what's happening. How do we, that those are ways in which you bring people together where they connect and make meaning of community and then contribute to their community. I think those are the kinds of things that will lead to a higher level of people voting when they know what's going on in their community and that they realize that they actually have the power. They have the power to shift decisions and it's informed. They know who the candidates are. They know the humanity of those candidates, and they know the skills and the capacities of those candidates. It's really interesting. Lately, because of the election coming up, I've had lots of conversations with people where they've said, it's interesting. Cambridge is so divided about who to vote for. There is no one group that is endorsing a similar set of candidates, and you realize that what's actually happening is that it's the information that people are getting is very driven by vested interests. It might be vested interests in bicycling environment versus, the future of Black and brown kids or schools or whatever it is. But it is coming from a point of view, and it is not an independent source that gives you credible information about who is this person, what are they about, what are their values, what is their background, what are their interests. And I think that's the kind of thing that we are hoping that this effort will emerge into.
Thanks. I want to invite everyone. We have been talking up here, and it's just such a great panel. I could talk with you all day. I'm going to introduce two other INN staff here today, our Chief Development Officer, Lisa Gardner-Springer, and Stephanie Schenkel, our Network Philanthropy Director. And they're going to run mics. Yay. And then we'll join us after. So I don't know if you guys want to stand up, stretch. And we have Gita and Greg here, and then our earlier panelists are right here and Robbie here. So you can address your questions to anyone or all. Okay. So we'll need show of hands if anyone has a question, just to get you the mic. Yeah, we have here and then Julie. Hang on, tech check here for a moment. Stephanie. Whoop. There you go. Thanks, Stephanie.
I got the mic first, so I'll ask the first question. Columnists, I think you mentioned at the New Bedford Light. How did you get columnists, and what's the payment structure for them versus a reporter?
So it's a contract that they work under, and he's a staff columnist. So he's paid, what I would consider a pretty good salary for someone. Yeah, so he's not paid by the column that he contributes. We do have a spot on it's called Community Voices, and that's where we encourage guest columnists, op-ed pieces, people to send in anything from, really, we've published poetry, we've published a lot of different, things, photo galleries that people have taken. So yeah, so we're always trying to reach out and get more voices and get more participation. But our columnist, he's actually, he's a colleague of mine from the Standard Times when I was the managing editor. I got laid off, and then shortly after that, he got laid off. And so when I was at the Light, we just said, this guy, Jack Spillane, is pretty good. Let's get him. So yeah, so we hired him, and he's working for us and doing a heck of a job. He's a really tenacious digger.
Yeah, I had a follow-up regarding the op-ed pieces, because it's something that, everyone has an opinion and everyone's an expert in town, you're finding out. And, I know op-ed pieces can take some rigor to make sure that, first of all, that they're not just spouting nonsense that's not true. So I'm just curious how folks on the panel or in the room deal with op-ed pieces, because it's something I'm, I think we'll scale up to it, but I'm not ready to just like turn over our site to op-ed columnists right away.
Great. Can you share your name and what
Oh, I'm
organization
sorry.
you're with?
I'm
just
sorry.
so
My
anyone
name's
knows?
Kevin Sullivan and I'm with the Belmont Voice and we're in startup mode.
Great. Well, can everybody hear me? Okay, this is good. So yeah, it is difficult to deal with columnists, and it's also it helps to be aware of the community and know that somebody may be speaking from a really specific paradigm and and trying to push an agenda. We do allow people to express their opinions, but we don't allow them to state misinformation. So, it's a matter of we sometimes have to fact check, look at the columnists that are writing as guest pieces and say, well, this doesn't really pass muster for us. And we will contact them and tell them why, and maybe they'll submit another piece that's acceptable. But it's not just an open door to publish everything you want, post whatever you want. They're curated, they go through an editing process, and just like letters to the editors, we work hard to avoid printing false information.
I'm just curious how
The board and Brian have had a discussion. Board and big always is better. The board and Brian had a discussion about that recently. Should it be letters to the editor? Should it be op-ed pieces? And Brian's experience was that when you have letters to the editor, it's opening up a storm drain. And that it may be better to invite people to present opinions, pro and con, whatever the issue is. So we haven't done it yet, but that's something we're looking at doing shortly.
And as somebody, one of my early jobs was transcribing the sound off calls that come in and the unhinged, overnight, drunken, racist rants. I definitely am on board with not allowing a floodgate of that. So there is something to be said for being a little bit conservative, but you're putting out there.
And also social media takes care of that part.
Yeah, I let people hash it out on Facebook, but we'll probably do like for say there's a big issue in town, inviting people to do op-eds, but really making sure that you keep it even and balanced and all points of view in there. But it has to be something that it's very limited that we control, because you don't want to just let everybody. I mean, Newton has 88,000 people. You don't want 88,000 people being able to give their opinion at the same time. That's chaos.
Back here.
Tim Lowe, I'm with the Worcester Guardian, so we're new in town, at least the nonprofit news town. And I grew up in Newton, essentially, so I have, actually, as a Newton North alum, I have a recommendation. Go see the folks at the Newton. They've done good work over the years. It's a terrific high school operation. Could be fun. If you're going to stack BC in there, go with North. Yes, I went to Newton North. I don't care about Newton South. My question is more about the New Bedford paper. There's some feedback here, sorry. So Leanne, as CEO, how do you spend your time? And then my second question is about the daily catch, which I think is quite interesting.
Okay, sorry, I was trying to see if I could stop the feedback. Your first question is how I spend my time. So today is day one of the CEO position. So I spend it at Harvard. No, I was working at the Light previously. So if I had to divide my time, goodness, a big chunk of it, the lion's share of it probably is development and fundraising related. I do have 2 people that work with me on it, but just, kind of the overall strategy and the follow-up and
I'm very much involved in that part, as well as meeting with donors, our significant donors. So that's the lion's share. And then there was just a lot of just general operations stuff that took up my time. As CEO, I hope to shave off some of that operations stuff and pass it off to our CFO so that I can focus even more on fundraising. And then what was your second question? Oh, yeah, I'll give it to Andy.
Okay, so when we started the light, we wanted to do the stories about New Bedford that celebrated New Bedford and include a lot of the unique things that just make New Bedford special. So New Bedford is the #1 fishing port in the country. And it's been that way for more than 20 years in terms of the value of its catch. Largely that's because scallops are so expensive. But it's a huge fishing community, and billions of dollars go through the harbor in terms of money coming in, the fish going out, being packaged and sold all around the world. So there is an auction, an online auction. There used to be an auction that would be on the radio. I grew up as a kid listening to it. Sand dabs, 26 cents a pound. Small cod, small haddock, and they would read it over the air on the local radio station, and it was really cool. You just listen to that, and this is the price of the fish on the docks that day. So they've switched. They've now have a computerized system where people all around the world bid on price of raw seafood that's coming into the harbor, and they do it through an online auction. And so at the end of the day, every morning when it's over, we get the numbers, and they provide it to us, and it's a pay service. So we pay for it and publish it every day. And it's steadily and moderately popular. Every day when I look at the stories in my Parsley analytics and see them, it's always there with about 400 or 500 page views every day, one day after the next. So yeah, and people really appreciate that. And it was carried in the local newspaper until the newspaper didn't want to pay for it anymore. So then it was just a missing piece of New Bedford's culture that we brought back.
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm the resident young person here.
How you gonna come in the room and call us all old at the same time? We outnumber you, right, Alex?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm with the MIT graduate program in science writing. I also lead a small nonprofit newsroom. We cover issue-based work about science and society. I have a three-parted question for you all. The first part is, how do you make sure that your work is being reaching young people and actually serving the news they need? The second part is, how do you support young people who want to do news or maybe start a nonprofit newsroom? And the third part is, how do you make sure we can build up habits of young people, especially when they are very broke or they did not grow up with local news, to build up this habit of supporting local news either through subscriptions or donations or by word of mouth? Thank you.
Well, I can jump in. When I can remember in my old age, I one of the things we do at Binge is we have Horizon Mass, which is a news portal that we've recently started, and it really focuses in on using younger folks as the team. So we have, what is it, about 18 interns this year? 18 this summer, right now. Boom, thank you. See, this was the memory part as you get older. But because we're focusing on kind of developing that next group of folks, that's where those things that you're talking about. So I feel like that's a building block or a foundational piece that people can build from. So building that next group of building that next group of journalists through giving them the opportunity, because I think, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the whole idea of kind of realizing and understanding the new channels of storytelling is connecting with the people who are really engaging in those spaces. So, as brilliant as we all are, we don't know everything. And part of, I believe, our solution is really kind of a connection between a cross-generational connection. I don't think you're ever successful if you're just one group of folks. I think you have to have a variety of voices at the table in order to be able to get anything to be successful. And I think a key part of that, for at least at Binge, is doing the Horizon Mass thing.
I'll add to that a little bit. I don't know much about news, but I know a lot about youth development and community development. And I would say that, one of the most wonderful things about young people is that they are fearless. They're absolutely fearless. They will say it like they see it. And a couple of years ago, we actually did our annual report where we did it in the voices of young people. And the sophistication of understanding key issues and the impact that it has on their future was really key. So one thing I would say is I think it's really important to engage young people and their points of view. I think they receive news in a very different way than many of us are used to. We all still love our newspapers. We still love to sit down with a cup of coffee and read the newspaper. But it is that quick bites and allowing it to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that if they're engaged, they will become supporters. In fact, we have actually used we worked with young people, including the Mayor's Youth Council in Cambridge, to raise money for causes. And they are amazing. They will go out, they will door knock, and they're so passionate about the cause that you cannot just help but open your wallet and give them something. So
it's not something we've had a lot of discussion about, but Brian, being a younger old person, he feeds our social media channels. You did a story recently about Indigenous people today on Instagram. Yeah. So he is reaching out to the non-print part of the world. But it's like we did with BC, it's certainly something we could consider asking North and South if they'd like to contribute content to the Beacon. I agree that the high school newspapers can have a lot of good content. In Newton, you talked about the Republic of Cambridge. In Newton, it's the Republic of Education. They tend to operate with a fairly substantial wall between them and the rest of the world. So it isn't always easy to crack that, but I think they may be interested in what we could do.
So at New Bedford Light, I mentioned earlier briefly that we have this team of interns every summer. And so I'd encourage you to go take a look at the video. It's newbedfordlight.org. I can give you a card later, but just check it out because it's young people asking questions about their future from other young people. And so I think that's a way to give voice, and it's voice that you don't have to read 1,000-word story as somebody was standing about here. It's video, and you can watch video and see people do it. So we've also done a lot of video, and it's a way that we try to reach out to a lot of different groups. We video on the homeless people to tell their stories of who they are as individuals, and not this sort of blob of people that you just, oh, that's the homeless. And we've done the same thing with immigration stories, people who have come from Guatemala or Central America and come up, and we've written a story, but we've told a video tale of that too. We have a Chilean journalist who works for us, and he's bilingual. We do videos in English with Spanish subtitles, and in Spanish with English subtitles for the same story. And so that's Noticias NB. And we're working to do, we've translated some of our stories that we've done with ProPublica and with the Marshall Project into Spanish, and then promoted them through social media as well. But there's only so much bandwidth we have, but we're really constantly trying to poke out there and see what can we do next? What can we do next? So not satisfied with what we've done, but still looking to do more.
Hi, I'm Irene Segi. I'm with Brookline.News. I'm back in ancient history, like 78 to 81. I was at the Cambridge Chronicle, a former editor of the Cambridge Chronicle, and I appreciate what you said about Cambridge. It's a special place. So I have, I guess, basically two questions. So one is for the New Bedford Light, and I don't think Newton's at that point yet, but many people do you have not in the newsroom? You're hiring outside. You have a newsroom of 12. What about the non-newsroom side? And what order did you hire people in terms of the balance between newsroom and the business side? And then my other question, I guess, for both places is how do you use you have an advisory council in New Bedford and the what is it? Oh, the editorial council, whatever. And advise, right, in Newton. And what do those groups do? How do they advise you, and how do you organize them, and what do they do?
So for the New Bedford Light, we have 17 staff, 12 in the newsroom, and then we have the rest, in the non-editorial side. The order of hiring was there was a pro bono publisher and a pro bono editor started as pro bono, and then they had 2 freelance reporters, and that's how the Light started. So very, very small. And I'd say, the newsroom probably took the first jump, and then on the business side, then we started to grow that more incrementally. So it wasn't the most linear path. It's kind of hard to summarize, but right now it's 12 people in the newsroom and 5 people not in the newsroom. So, my position, I was previously Chief Strategy and Administrative Officer. We have a part-time CFO, and then we have a Director of Community Engagement and Business Development, and we have a Director of Advancement, so Director of Fundraising, and then we have an Office Manager. That was 5, right? And the Office Manager is also part-time. So so is the CFO right now. So we do a lot of, we have 5 individuals, but they're not equal to 5 FTEs. And our advisory council, we're having only our 2nd meeting this month. So it still is new in formation. The idea is that it would not have any editorial input. However, it is independent of the newsroom, but that they would help us champion the Light in their respective communities and networks, and provide guidance, and advice. Some of them have technical expertise that they could offer us, lawyers, that type of thing. So yeah, it's still what exactly it's going to be hasn't totally been figured out yet, but yeah, we're working on it. So did you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's good. I think that's probably good. We also get input from the community. This isn't an employees, but we tend to go out and find information from people. It's beyond the staff.
Right now, we have a full-time editor who's paid and a few freelance writers who are paid per story. And then we have what I would call executive privilege, which is the board is not paid. And the editorial council, which is fairly new, last 3 months or so, made up of former journalists who all live in Newton, who can help Brian with proofreading and story ideas and other materials. So it's separate from the board. The board isn't regularly going to Brian and saying you should do this and you should do that. The council doesn't do that either. He's fairly independent, but as he mentioned, he's new to Newton, and there's a lot you can learn from other people, whether it's the board or the editorial council.
Sometimes it's as mundane as I'll send around a group email to them and say, is there anything not election related that's going on like this week that I can cover? And they always get back to me with ideas. So.
Okay, we're running up against it. We're going to go to Charlie in the corner and then the shoestring from Western Mass.
I want to hear from the shoestring really quickly, but I'm Charlie Sennett. I'm the founder of the Ground Truth Project, and we are the home of Report for America. So we know Sue's awesome work. I have so many connections in this room. It's incredible, but I worked with and for Robbie, and I survived that. I have a son, Will Sennett, who works the New Bedford Light covering the fishing industry. I teach at Boston College, so some of the students I'm teaching are going to be doing your stuff. And I'm so proud that this local news revolution is right here in our hometown. Thank you for putting this together, Sue. I really appreciate it. My question is the one I thought Alex was going to ask, the young guy. I'm really interested in what you're thinking about in terms of AI. Do you fear it? Do you think this is an incredible opportunity? I know you're probably not in a place where you're ready to think it through quite yet, but maybe you are. And that's it. I just want to know, like, what is some thinking around AI and the role it can play in really serving local communities?
I'm gonna let my chatbot answer that. You're right in saying that we haven't looked into it enough. I mean, it has great opportunities just from what I've read, but we haven't looked at any way to try to employ it in what we do. But it's interesting. We'll have to watch.
I would say,
I just wanted to mention, I was reading, I don't know if you guys saw it lately, but Gannett actually tried to use AI in their sports coverage, and it went so spectacularly bad, they've scrapped the entire long-term plan to do that because the first time they tried it, it was just completely awful. So it's has been tried by the bigger companies. It's just been a mess.
Greg?
I was going to say that I think the way that AI can be incorporated is not necessarily on the actual writing or the envisioning and the thought process of it. It's the tool piece of it. So going back to the whole idea of the different channels and how you do that, how do you take that 1,000-word story and turn that into a video? That's, I think, the gap in the space where AI can work, and it also keeps us within the space of the journalistic integrity that we want to maintain, because we're using it as a tool. So it's just like an editor. It's not an editor in the sense of like someone who's looking at your words, but literally like an editor is taking the pauses and the ums out of your podcast or something like that. I think that's probably the way. How do we take that 1,000-word article and create it and make it into a listicle that becomes a YouTube video that probably travels just as much, if not more, than the link to your article. So I think for me and a lot of conversations that we've been having, that's probably the space that I feel the most comfortable with AI, because like you said, I feel like I almost can feel when I read something that some little sprinkle of AI in it. I can just tell, because one of the beautiful parts about journalism and about art or just any of that stuff is that you can feel the connection. Like, no one is a journalist because they're gonna get rich. You know what I mean? Nobody. Like, I don't know. Well, I speak for me. I don't know what you guys drove here in. I drove in a truck. Um, but I think it's that passion and that love what makes you create those things. It makes you want to tell those stories. It makes you want to be able to kind of connect your neighbors through the information that you can give them. And I don't think, as great as technology can be, it's a tool, and I think it can allow us to do that. My buddy Teddy Ted is one of the people that I work with at Embrace Boston, who helps us put our podcast together. And so along the lines of the AI, one of the things that I'm looking at for as an editor for us is a platform called Riverside.fm, and you can record video, audio, all that through there. And in a conversation, you have ums and gaps and spaces. Like, it literally, you push a button and all that stuff is gone. So that is where AI, I feel, can help us. But you can't, the soul of journalism, the piece that really makes you tell that story, that makes you stay up all night going through the Freedom of Information Act and looking through all that stuff, that comes from people. And I don't think we're ever going to be able to just separate ourselves from that.
So, yes. I was just going to respond to the AI. Charlie, you said, is it good or bad? I say yes. We don't know, really. We haven't spent 1 minute as a board talking about AI, but I have in my mind, I'd like to work with AI to help generate a marketing plan. And I think it can generate ideas, and then you need human editorial and judgment to polish it. So I definitely think if you ignore it, it's going to bite you at some point.
Yeah.
We still have time.
String.
Brian Zayas from the Shoestring. I'm asking Geeta, but anyone who has an opinion can feel free to jump in. I'm just really curious, how do we kind of keep moving this conversation forward about community foundations supporting journalism? Because this is something I've come up against in Western Mass, is that there's some interest among the staff, but it still is not currently a priority area for them. And I think I've been hearing this from other folks too. And so, you know, just to keep it brief, I'm just wondering, how do we kind of keep those conversations going to get community foundations interested in this work?
I think one of the biggest roadblocks that we came across actually when we tried to support the local group that wanted to look into this issue was the IRS, which does not allow you to fund anything that is news related. It has to be educational. It has to come from a nonprofit. And so, I think that I think there's a lack of so we had to actually go to our general counsel to figure out, okay, how can we actually make it possible? And I think that might actually be a little bit of a roadblock for many community foundations to actually think about it. I also don't think that they think about their role. And this is an area that I think is emerging as we think about, how do we build social cohesion and connection in our communities? How do we look at the deepening of democracy? Community foundations have the tendency to to want to stay out of politics, and I would say kudos to the Boston Foundation that really led the effort in the state about foundations being involved in public policy, and in fact nationally led this effort. So I think it's something that will come. The more you can tell them that so and so is doing it, the more it catches on. So but yeah. Yes, I mean a 501c3, you can fund a 501c3, but you cannot fund an independent news related. The threshold that IRS holds for funding news related issues is much higher than funding a nonprofit that is providing social services.
When you were talking to Kim today about this stuff, I had advised them to talk to INN. I
Yeah.
don't agree with this.
Yeah, in fact, INN, that was the connection that we made. And INN is the fiscal sponsor, and that is how we were able to fund it.
I think I'll just address this for a moment. Most nonprofit news organizations in the US are registered as educational organizations with the IRS. There is a nationwide campaign now called Press Forward. We are seeing a lot of community foundations that aren't traditionally news supporters, pledge added giving, realizing these community development and democracy challenges. And then there are current programs like Newsmatch, collaborations, RFA. There are ways, and we are seeing more and more community foundations come into those. So, feel free if any have questions, if you guys feel them, we are happy to help with that. And so are many others in the field, and to grow that support. Okay, this really is the last question, but we can hang out after.
This is actually going to be less than 30 seconds because I just want a show of hands. Sorry, this is Beena Sarwar from Sapan News. Just want a show of hands of how many orgs here are entirely voluntary.
Voluntary?
All volunteers.
Okay.
Sorry, who? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. New Bedford Light is all voluntary?
Yeah.
No. I mean the organization having no paid staff. That's what I meant. The news organization. Just thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, just saying we have our own challenges.
Yeah. We do see many organizations start with either part or entirely volunteer efforts. The encouraging news I will leave you with is that it generally takes 3 to 5 years. We now have data tracking it till startups are really kind of on their feet and growing or holding at a level that, fits the size of their community. So hang in there and keep growing, get paid. Thank you. Thank you all. I'm amazing, inspired by what you do. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. And anyone is welcome to hang out. Our members are going to be here for a while. We have lunch. We'll let the room clear out a little bit because it's a bit of a trek, and you don't want to lose sight of the person in front of you. It's down some zigzagging halls and up an elevator.